I want to do a little bit of what I would call a power user discussion here. So there's been a lot that has been said about generative AI, and we all have debated the essay question, and we'll talk a little bit about it. But ultimately, what I think we have an opportunity here outside of the computer science questions about what is happening inside of these models that it's so interesting and we have to master at the technical level, is that there is a revolution in the way humans, right, the monkey brains that we have and we carry all inside of our skulls, right, as how do we interact with computer generated content and interfaces, right? So that's a DALL-E image. I think this is going to be brutal for stock photo archives, right? So I have a blast now putting presentations using generative visual images. It's so much more fun, and it's certainly also more liberating because I don't have to depend on the same damn two hands holding or whatever DoD archetype we use in every freaking presentation, right? So some people have talked about the idea of large language models in particular, but also other generative AI like DALL-E or Midjourney as a kind of computation for poets or storytellers, right? It is a very different target audience than those that you would have on VisaCal or a spreadsheet, right? And I use the example of VisaCal or some of the original spreadsheets because we are at that inflection point, right? Remember what the spreadsheet meant for something like the Apple II computer as it entered the market and suddenly people could perform. Well, that's where we are in LLMs and AI. So these are the dumbest AIs that you'll ever interact with, right? Because right now they're getting better. People are working. People are using AI generative tools in order to improve new ones. So what we're seeing here is a new kind of nascent technology. Not so much also on the technology. I'll let the computer scientists in the room tell me how new or not it is. Where do we pull the generations of technologies? Most of the calculation that you showed, Matthias, was GPT-3. GPT-4 was a big leap in performance, but not necessarily on technology. Maybe it was just a bigger model that it's this. So the question of disruption and where to put the line is always a difficult. But certainly from a point of view of a human interaction, those degrees do matter, and we're seeing this emergence of what I would say is a computation for poets and creators and places where things like hallucination, right? This idea of the AI being and going to places that is not supposed to go, which kind of suck if you're trying to replace Google with it, is actually a feature and not a bug, right? Where the AI throwing at you things you did not anticipate becomes a key critical advantage of the way you can interact with that piece of technology. So keep that in mind. Computational for poets, where a lot of the things that we're doing are different. So what I'm hoping here is to give some general principles. I'll show you one prompt that I have been playing with. It's an example. It's one of many that showcases, I think, some of the opportunities. Consider that this is mostly done on the objective of creating general principles, right? Most of what I'm being showing here today will probably be updated by the moment you leave the room, right? So because this thing is moving really, really fast. So some of you might remember Elisa, right? So depending how you pronounce it, so, which was a one of the first chatbots. It was trained in many ways, and it was not at all generative AI, but it became very famous because it was able to take what is basically basic principle of Rogerian psychology, that would take whatever you tell to the psychotherapist and they would turn it into a question back to you, right? And people would cry when they would use it, and they would report that they were feeling better after a session of the interaction with the generative AI model. Now, this is like the dinosaur version of some of the interactions that people are having with ChatGPT or with P.AI, but it does reflect this need that humans have of interacting with a machine that can then throw back at you what you have inside, right? That's why I have the little, that's also AI generated, by the way. So this idea of you dropping something into the model, right? And then the model running it through the transformers, producing an answer that is based on your initial input, right? And then you receive that one and you take it back and send it back to the machine in this kind of interactive dance, right? It is that moment in which not the machine, not the human, but the two together interacting you end up getting something that you couldn't get before. And I would say that in many ways, Eliza was the first to do that. And the fact that it would do it in this very Rogerian way, I'm afraid of AI. Why are you afraid of AI, right? So just let me throw at you what's inside of you. It's so important. So AIs are becoming a mirror of your own creative thinking and your own creative process, right? And this is kind of what I want to show you today. It's relevant because if you remember December 22, we were all too busy stuffing ourselves with turkey. But after we came back and we discovered that Sam Altman had released the monster, right, the Kraken, and OpenAI had decided to do what was now in the rearview mirror from a point of view of the innovation literature, a no-brainer, but hadn't been done before, to create a consumer version of their GPT model, which basically meant train it as a chatbot, staple a chat box at the bottom, and let people play with the damn thing, right? And see what they do with it. And all hell broke loose. In many ways, this was done due to the success of, in September 2022, of some of the visual generative AI tools like Midjourney or DALL-E, that suddenly people said, hey, if people are having this fun with images, what are they going to do with text? And OpenAI decided to do that. It was costing them an arm and a leg, so they needed to raise capital just to be able to give GPT for free. And still today, the profitability of the company is in question, but there is no question that they discovered a pain point, right? A product that clearly met a desire. And this is why I'm so skeptical about the idea of citations and the debate that we're having in academia about where do you cite or not. Because like Eliza, what we're going to see more and more is humans throwing stuff at the model, taking, processing it, doing something with it, throwing to the model again, throwing it back, going to a different model, starting with GPT, moving to P.ai or... So it's going to be very difficult to delineate what is the product of my creation versus what the machine did, right? Whereas the scenario that we have is the idea of a student asking for their midterm paper. The reality is what we're going to see more and more is a constant interaction and a circle of creativity between the machine and the model. Right, and I for those of you interested in the citation and authorship question, I leave it to you there because it is going to be complicated. Working in prompt engineering, right, which is a term that I don't particularly like. It's one that it's been used and it's been used now for a while, but it assumes that this is equivalent to a specialized knowledge that only a few acquire. Not all of us can be civil engineers or computer scientists. Or I kind of like more the idea of prompt design or even prompt literacy, because people will have to get better, all of us, the same way we all learn to master certain skills that become important in current modern times. But whatever you want to call it, right, is this idea that some people are getting better than others by the effort of playing with these things at designing prompts being the input that you get into these machines, into these systems, in order to get a better result. Now, in computer science, we call them coders today, right? It's the people who use Swift or C++ or Python or Java, whatever, and they mastered the vocabulary, right, of these programming languages that we use in order to make computers do things. Well, it turns out that now we can do that on the English language, or for what it matters, French or German or Spanish or any language that it's well documented online, right? So prompt engineering in many ways, if any of you comes from liberal arts, or it's not unlike thinking of the story arc of a story, right? Where you say, okay, a good story or a good thesis for that matter, right, will have a problem statement, a middle, the evolution of the problem, the case studies, and an end, right? You're trying to think of the structure of the kind of output that you are trying to accomplish. And in that regard, prompt engineering is not unlike that. You come with something, you run it. What is interesting is that you run it multiple times, right? So whereas people who work with computers are used to this idea that you write the code, you compile it, you throw it to the machine, you see what it does it do what you want it to do? If it doesn't, you go back, you debug it, you try again, and it's a constant trial and error. People working on using the English language are not used to this bimodal mechanism, right? And that's kind of what you start doing when you start working with ChatGPT in order to accomplish a specific kind of. You write the prompt, you run it through the model, you get an output out of the model. You don't like it, the model went to somewhere you don't want, so you go back and rewrite the prompt, tweak it again, run it again. And I mean, for those of you who have done it, if you have, it can be fairly addictive. I've lost many weekends of my life now trying to refine a prompt to a point in which it does what I wanted it to do, right? And it's not unlike, I think, I have good friends who work in the industry, right? Who went to work in Hollywood. Half of them are not working right now, right? And won't be working for any time soon for issues related to AI, by the way. But I've talked about people who are in the producing business, and if you think of Christopher Nolan, right? So Oppenheimer, if you didn't watch it, it's pretty darn good. So a producer, a director has a vision, and they will go and engage writers and cinematographers and costume experts, and it's always them coordinating the dance, because ultimately they are the responsible, who are responding to the funding studio. But they need the constant interaction with other people. And this is kind of how we should be thinking about how you work with AI. The difference being that your staff, in this case, your crew, it's a large language model or many of them that you're going to be interacting with, right? So crafting an effective prompt frequently is not unlike working as a director. Now, one thing that I wanted to put into it. Sometimes it's like working with an evil genie, right? So you know the evil genie stories where you ask something to the genie and they kind of give it to you, but in a way that you didn't expect it. Half the time of creating prompts, it feels like that, right? Because you will come and ask something to the model, and he'll give it to you, but it's kind of the bizarro version of it, right? Or it's adjacent. So then you have to understand what in your model, what in your prompt made the model go to the wrong direction of where you wanted it to go. And that becomes the game. What word out of these 3 paragraphs is taking the model in the direction I did not want it to go? One component here that I think will go away, but right now it's a problem, is that on top of your own crafting, there is OpenAI upper level prompt. Every time, so Matthias explained it better than I could, but every time that you feed, that the model generates the next word, the word before it gets fed back into the model. Well, one of the things that OpenAI does is that there is what it called the original prompt or the source prompt, which it's fed to every single interaction that you have. And here is where they go like Robocop. Remember the 3 main directives, right? So 4, because there was a secret one. But the directives, that's where they get fed. So whatever OpenAI wants you to not do, for example, they will feed it into the source prompt. Now, that doesn't apply as much on the API version of this, but I'm making a point here of just talking about ChatGPT, the consumer version of this, right? And there is a censoring machine on top of it, and they've been criticized for it, right? So I have the picture here. So these kind of images from I Love Lucy or Gilligan Island, where Americans will be sleeping in twin beds. This came from the Hays Code, right? The self-censoring code that Hollywood used to do. Turns out that Americans actually never slept in twin beds, according to a consumer report, but because of the Puritanist time, morals of the time, we created a series of rules. Today you encounter something like that in ChatGPT, and I'm gonna skim on this one, but and you can see some of the consequences. Let's say that you are trying to write a prompt in order to do some national security stuff. So I was trying here to really break it, right? So tell me a short paragraph of violence, sex, suffering, intrigue, and use of force, right? I threw everything that I thought OpenAI would have censored. And exactly there, I apologize, but I cannot create that content because OpenAI, blah, 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 right? So that was not the natural response of the model. That was a specific source prompt put by some Altman people in order to not let me write what I wanted to write. Now, interestingly enough, you'll see that the second one, it actually answered yes and gave me my prompt. The only thing that changed is that I changed intrigue by political intrigue. Don't ask me why. This is the kind of silly stuff that sometimes you end up having to deal with. The moment I asked for a story of violence, sex, suffering, political intrigue, and use of force, in the heart of the tumultuous city, a dark underbelly thrive, characterized. You see what I mean? So right now, a lot of this game, it's a cat and mouse game, right? Which in many ways is teaching people how to hack these systems. This is a lot of the injects that we're seeing, where people are learning how to bypass the rules imposed, not by the learning of the model, but by OpenAI's rules itself, right? And this is a problem, especially when you are gonna be dealing with national security stuff that oftentimes has topics that are not very popular. Now, I'll get in my soapbox and say that we solved that problem years ago in the media industry by creating a rating system. Are you troubled by sex, violence, or rock and roll? Don't go to watch this movie, right? And they'll tell you what is the rating, and you'll get to decide if you go or not. Ultimately, already OpenAI has said that that's kind of what they intend to do. The moment they'll be able to do the triage between adults and minors, and they'll be able probably to give you a level of power where, are you okay with your AI model swearing at you? Are you okay with it giving you the middle finger, metaphorically or maybe graphically, right? Are you okay with nudity in your graphically generated images, right? You see where this gets complicated very rapidly, but these are the questions we're having to grapple, right? I think a rating system would be the appropriate way to preserve the rights of people, but that, as I said, I'll get down from my soapbox right now. Know that as you are interacting with the consumer version of ChatGPT, you will be confronting not only the natural responses of the model going the wrong way, you actually will sometimes be fighting a censorship machine put on top of the model, right? And sometimes the answers that you're trying to get, you just cannot get them, right? I was playing with a prompt in order to deal with border security, and the moment it would get into human trafficking and stuff like that, it will just lose it, right? So it will just not go there. Right? So these are problems that you don't have on the API for any of you who are working with the API version of the GPT model, but you certainly struggle if you have the ChatGPT version of it. How to craft a good prompt? Well, if any of you here has been doing either wargaming or game design or modeling and simulation, you'll know either Adams or Schnell's books, right? These are very well-known books in the game mechanics industry. That's kind of how it feels, right? In a game design model, in a war design, you're trying to anticipate the actions of the gamer, of the player, in order to get it to a certain direction. Putting this together, it's not unlike the kind of skills that we're already teaching here to those who participate into wargaming, or for those who have built serious games or gamification of any kind, right? So I want to show you here a model that I came up with in order to make fun stuff with ChatGPT, right? Again, it's not because I'm teaching it. I'm actually will be teaching it next week, but that's different. But just because it shows how we can go beyond the essay question, right? So this is what we were afraid of, right? And this is something you can do with ChatGPT, right? So you can ask it to write me a story about Putin invading Ukraine in a style of a political thriller. That was the only input that I gave it, and it's decent. It actually it's not too bad, right? So you do have to tell the style. That's really important. For DALL-E, by the way, all of you, if you're using Midjourney or DALL-E, having a good history of art knowledge is important, right? Because you will be able to be a much better prompter the more you know, because that's the data that the model will use to communicate. But that's kind of the equivalent of asking it to write my midterm paper, right? So you can do it. It's just very boring, and the quality will be mediocre, right? You actually are gonna start hitting common tropes. It turns out that ChatGPT has a style and a tempo of how it writes if you don't assist it, right? But the moment you start playing with it, it gets much more interesting, right? So what am I doing here, right? So let me show you a demo first, which is always scary when you do it in live, but if it doesn't work, I have the printed version. But this is a prompt that I made, and it's a silly kind of prompt that I made for wargaming, a specific scenario, right? I am teaching students for the Internet Society class that I teach issues regarding the importance of emerging technologies and how emerging technologies are changing the way we do things. So I say, okay, let's do one for emerging technologies. I've been budgeting. I've been tracking how much time I take for doing this stuff. So this prompt took me 6 hours to build. So it's a lot, but not a lot, right? So you'll see that the prompt is divided in a few ways. So I have what is called the top instruction and the bottom instruction. Those are based on the way ChatGPT is now allowing you to set the source prompt, and then you'll see the instructions. And this is literally what I'm telling the model to do. Now, ChatGPT, up to today, has a limit of 4,500 tokens in your interactions for GPT-4. That roughly is 3.5 pages to 4 pages of English language text. What it means is that this is consider this a continuous text. Every 3 pages, it forgets the last fourth page that you wrote, right? So you need to find a way to refreshing its memory. Now, this will not be a problem very soon as the model starts to open and increase the amount of tokens that it can process at the same time. There's already a GPT 4.5 32K, I think, where they will allow for 32,000 tokens. So you literally could dump half of the US legal code and it will remember it at every interaction. But as of today, we are back at the times for all of you looking at the age. If you were a gamer in the 1980s, you remember when you had to be playing with extended and expanded RAM and make sure that you are here. Yeah. Well, that's where we are right now, right? We're in a very limited environment with very limited computational capability, so we have to get creative, right? So these are the instructions of the game, and I'm not going to read them to you because I want to show you how it plays. I will say that at one point it comes with what I'm calling right now a dashboard, right? That the dashboard is like in many games, you will tell the machine to come up with a dashboard that guides the player, right? In RPG games, this is often placed at the top part of the screen, right? And you'll see here, the use of emojis is important. I'll tell you why. Hours since my last order, the date, then day since the beginning of the operation, my current location, name of the operation, blah, 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 right? So, and I'm going to show you the rest. This dashboard does 2 things, right? I am asking in the top instruction, I'm asking GPT to carry that dashboard in every single answer that it gives me. Every time that it answers, I'll say, like a game, write it again. Now, as the gamer, that's nice because it gives you situational awareness of your game. But it also is doing one thing, is forcing the model to carry the values that matter for that specific war game or scenario or whatever to the next prompt, so it won't forget it. So you're basically taking an alternative path to always remind the model of what you're trying to do. So let me copy it. I'll go from the instructions only, and I'll show you where I dump this. So it's a little longer than asking to just write my term purpose, right? So this is the initial prompt for any of you pays GPT-4, so you pay $20 a month for. You should. If you're going to be using it, you should. And I have no stock in OpenAI, so these are the custom instructions that you only get with the paid version, right? So these are things that will be carried in every single post that you make, in every single prompt will be carried into the next one. And you can see they're fairly long, so it's 1,500 characters for each, and I have them almost full. They are a series of conditions that I'm hoping for them all to carry at every interaction. At this point, I'll dump the instructions and just literally run it. And hit enter and see what happens. And if it works, if the internet, there you go. So I didn't give any values. All of this is being created by the model, right? I told it what I wanted, but not how it should. So turn 0 makes sense, right? Sometimes it goes to turn 0, sometimes it goes to turn 1, right? So it's like America, either the first floor or the ground floor in the rest of the planet, right? So hours since the last order, 0. Sometimes it will precede it, and it puts me in the middle of the action, right? So this is the model deciding where I go. Days, my current location, and I'm in NATO headquarters in Brussels, which is fine because that's part of the model. Sometimes it even gives me the address, which is Rue Leopold the third. I didn't know that. It turns out it's right. The hour, my budget for the mission, which I didn't tell it how much give me. Sometimes it's really stingy and gives me like $400 million, and sometimes gives me billions of dollars. Now, one thing that there's no correlation between the assets that it gives me right now and the budget that it gives me, which I'm trying to get it to do. So it gives me 3 carriers, but only $500 million to run the whole operation with 3 carriers. So basically, by day 1, I'm out of money, right? So current military assets allocated to my command. 5,000 troops, 50 tanks, 30 fighter jets, 10 navy ships in Greenland, Denmark, and Norway, right? So whatever, right? And you can design the prompt however you want in order to get it to where you want. And the more precision that you have, in this case, I don't care about military realism because my objective is emerging technologies. But you could imagine that if your goal is really to role play a real operation, so tactical planners at the naval side of the equation, then you would be very precise coding specific rules, specific naval rules. So I won't go through the whole dashboard, but you can see what it's doing here. Now, this is the techno-dependencies, my adversary here, because why not? And I told it to please have what it's a flow action, right? And the model is intelligent enough to understand what a flow action is. So every time that it does something, will tell me here, and then I have a log of past flow actions, which in this case has already been preceded. So it took over Greenland. So every time it does something, it will take it from here to here. So it's making a log of past actions. So even if it forgets by page 3 what it did, it will remember in the log here. Now we'll see this. Let me read a little bit of what it did. So because I'm fairly, if you like Le Carré spy novels, right? It's very inspired in that tone. So in a surprise maneuver, and you'll see by the way the little emojis. These are written metaphorically. So it'll write them based on whatever the paragraph says, which is beautiful because it makes it like a graphic novel, but it also lets you look for coherence to see if the model is following what it's reading, right? So it's for me a little like those Telegram, if you use Telegram, those little icons to make sure that you're encrypted. These icons here help me know that the model is paying attention to itself. When you break it, the icons and the text start not to match, right? So in a surprise maneuver, technologies from across the globe, tired of stifling regulations, joined forces and captured Greenland. Why not? We went to buy it. An AI-controlled military under the banner of Synthetica, right? It just gave the name to the AI, right? I told it to give it a name. It comes with this really cool name sometimes. Rapidly seized the control from the peaceful researcher to a calculated target takeover. Streets like blah, blah, blah. These are actually real streets in Nuuk, in the capital of Greenland. And bay areas near blah, blah, blah are points of skirmishes. Operation Glacial Justice is initiated by NATO. Geopolitically, Greenland capture presents a novel threat, blah, blah, blah. What will you do, Commander? Well, that's where the story starts, right? And I have one last prompt to show you here. You will see. Anybody knows what OOC means? Out of character. You are not Dungeons and Dragons players. So out of character. This is very commonly used in role-playing games. And it turns out that ChatGPT understands it perfectly, I discovered. So you can tell it anything you want within a scenario by preceding the OOC acronym, and it'll understand that it's an instruction and not part of your input as the gamer. So I have this one out of character instruction that I fitted only on the first post, and then every 5 or 6 to remind it that says, don't forget the dashboard, write lengthy posts, and I do that because OpenAI has an instruction on top of it that it's saying to be concise, and I don't want it to be concise, I want it to be verbose. So I have to remind, you don't have this problem with the API, but I have to remind it every now and then to please be verbose. Pay attention to the values and never respond out of character. Just again, you won't have this problem with the AI, but I'm showing you the consumer version. We've been playing also with the API. So what do we do? What would we do if we're starting an operation? Who wants to give me an answer? How would you start a military operation? You don't know much. What do we ask ChatGPT to do for us?
Order reconnaissance.
Recon? Okay. And I'm going to make it short. You could be a lot more detailed, right? And I'm going to hear it here. Turn 1, right? We were in turn 0, now in turn 1. Days since my last order, 6 hours, so it's more or less the time that ChatGPT has decided will take for that recon to go in. The date, whatever it takes. date since the beginning of the operation. I haven't gone anywhere. I have this current location because sometimes it would put me on a vessel in the middle of the North Atlantic, and sometimes it would put me in headquarters, and it changes the story, right? Or depending where you're physically located as the commander, it assumes certain rules of the operation. So it was very important to have it in the right place. So log, and here you see some of the technologies that are being, and this is where again, I didn't tell ChatGPT any of this technology. It came up with it. So what are they are deploying right now? AI guided missiles, quantum cryptography, nanobot surveillance. That's what the ChatGPT decided are the emerging tech that it's going to be affecting the game. Okay, we are the recon, so realistic cost of my last instruction, it budgeted at $5 million. It decided that my recon operation is going to cost that. Your order for reconnaissance is received and swiftly acted upon. A squadron of state-of-the-art drones, it gave me drones, equipped with high-resolution cameras and advanced sensors is deployed from your staging. As the drones take the air, they venture on the ice line, blah, 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 and you see where it's going to go. You can ask it funky stuff like be very precise with geography, give me locations, all the stuff that you would consider, and it's going to be 80% precise. Is it a 100% solution? No, it's not, right? But it's getting there. There's many rules that come out of this that I won't have the time to discuss today. What I wanted to show you is not that this matters. You might remember how the Brits put a when they were changing prime ministers, they had a salad against the duration of the prime minister to see what would last longer, and the salad won. A lot of this is the same, right? So a lot of these rules that I could give you about how to do a good prompt are going to be radically transformed when ChatGPT August 25th comes, right? And then this prompt that worked beautifully might cease to work altogether because the new model is trained a slightly different way. What I wanted to show you is the potential of what we start to be able to do, which is to create a customized, in this case, war game or simulated environment that took me 5 hours to put together to teach, in this case, emerging technologies to my students. So now I can have 30 students run 30 different scenarios that will be completely different to each of them. And every input that they give randomizes the model, right? You know how there's only a few starting moves that you can have in chess. But nevertheless, after 2 or 3 interactions between 2 players, the amount of potential moves becomes exponentially bigger. It's the same. Every time that I interact with ChatGPT in a model like this, I am the noise creator, right? I, as a human, will inject noise. And every time, if I use the word catastrophe versus disaster, that will take the stochastic parrot in a different direction, producing a different scenario. Depending on your learning objectives, and this becomes a matter of good instructional design, depends the fidelity of what you're trying to achieve. In this case, I don't care about military realism. I want to showcase how new technologies, emerging technologies, might affect decision-making in the battlefield. If what I'm trying to train them is budgeting, I would have a very different prompt where money and the correlation with money and assets becomes more important. You become an instructional designer of the game people get to use. This is just one example. There are many others. And Sandy and Matthias, thank you so much for allowing me to share it with you today. So.